Hey everyone, welcome to today's edition of One Single Story, where each weekday we offer a brief lesson from a section of today's reading from the One-Year Bible, and we examine some questions that extend our learning from the Sermon on Sunday. Today I'm joined by Alyssa, Bream, and Wilkin, and we're looking at a passage from John chapter 4, verses 4 through 30. I'm going to read just a few of the verses. Verse 28 says, "The woman left her water jar beside the well and ran back to the village, telling everyone, 'Come and see a man who told me everything I did. Could he possibly be the Messiah?' So the people came streaming from the village to see him." So this past week, the sermon was on stress, and I think everybody can relate to having some level of stress. And if there's a woman who was dealing with stress, most likely it was this woman. So, Alyssa, you agree with that?
Yeah, she had multiple factors that would lead to stress in her life. We see in the story that she had multiple broken relationships, which would lead to social rejection and then just the daily survival if she's having to go get water and things. And she's a Samaritan, so that's another thing that ostracizes her out of everyone else around her. She lived in a culture where her past choices would have defined her. And one of the interesting things about the story is that she was drawing water at noon. Most of the time, the women would draw water in the early hours of the day when it was cooler. That's when people want to do yard work nowadays because it's cooler. And so some people have thought that maybe that was to avoid association with other women, that, she didn't want to have to go face them, look at them, either make small talk or, get talked about. And that was the social shame. But there's also a chance that maybe she just ran out of water. Maybe she had a thirsty camel or something. I don't know. But the real reason why was that it was a divine appointment with God, with Jesus there.
Yeah. And when Jesus asked her for water, he launches into this conversation about her whole backstory, which had to be extremely uncomfortable.
Stories can be uncomfortable.
Huh? Yeah.
Stories can be uncomfortable.
Are you referring to anything specific?
Not at all.
She had divorced 5 times, or at least that's the assumption, we make. And that would have been extremely unusual in that culture, that many divorces. Even in our culture, that would be extremely unusual. She's living with a man at this point, right? He's not her husband. And no doubt she's considered a social outcast. And so when I look at the condition of this lady, with all of the hurt, the social shame, the brokenness that came with divorce, and I imagine there are some issues of self-worth that she dealt with, I had to ask myself whether Jesus actually addressed her issues. Do you think her problems were fixed just because she came to believe that Jesus was the Messiah?
I think many times there seems to be a disconnect between church teaching about the Bible, Jesus, and salvation, and then having real answers to daily problems. Jesus gave her an actual actual answer to real life stress. Meeting Jesus is not just a abstract belief; it's an actual answer to our life challenges.
And I think we see the clues for that in the text. After encountering Jesus, she ran to tell all the people around him. And as I was reading this, I was like, man, there's so many times that Jesus says, don't tell people who I am, and he doesn't tell her that. This indicates that there is an internal change. We would have expected maybe that he would have restored her finances, restored her social standing, given her a new relationship or something else that would have changed it. But Jesus offered her living water, we see. Even though we might suspect a disconnect between her problems and a solution, she did not experience that disconnect. Her focus moved from her struggles to an eternal perspective. We see that her story no longer was a story of shame, but it became her testimony. In John 4:29, she says, "Come and see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could he possibly be the Messiah?" And I think that's one big indicator of healing, is when you're able to talk about your past and not cover it up. And that's what she did there. She was not just coping with it, but she was moving on from it. Rather than a social embarrassment, it became that defined her. She moved it to Jesus.
Yeah, I think this is a genuine answer to life stresses. The fact that Jesus is the Messiah tells us that we can have a completely different perspective on life.
That social shame piece is a big deal. How does knowing Jesus address tough issues like social shame?
I think instead of being defined by your past, right? I think shame is more when you're shameful of something, it's something that's happened in the past, right? So I think instead of being defined by your past or what people say, you're defined by His love. You have an identity in Christ. So knowing Jesus truly can take away some of those things because you're no longer defined by the shame of your past. You're defined by Jesus.
When you feel free from it, when Jesus saves you, you're able to be more honest with people around you. And that honesty, I think, is part of what creates that freedom. That's one of the reasons why things like life group and Bible studies and things that go on that are in smaller groups here, when people are able to talk and discuss and to be real with each other. And then you realize that other people have just as many problems as you do, and that they maybe just aren't as open with them if you feel like you're open. So I think that as you start to realize that everyone in life has things that they're ashamed of and things that they wish were different, that also helps kind of break down those barriers in current modern day life.
Yeah, I think there's probably two kind of lanes to this. One, if you are around other believers, they should have a certain amount of grace and understanding and desire to help you that the world culture might not have, right? And depending on what the issue is. And the other piece, I do think that honesty piece, the ability, one of the struggles with shame is not being able to say it, right? You're ashamed to talk about it.
Right.
And finding environments where you can speak about it is critically important. So how does knowing Jesus bring healing and recovery after things like divorce or broken relationship?
In just Him saying that He was the living water, He fills spaces that ordinary water couldn't. When she's saying, well, I have enough water right here, you don't think this is good enough? He's like, no, because I can fill more spaces. I think He fills the emptiness that a lot of those relationships or difficult situations couldn't fill.
Yeah, there's a hope that comes with it. And I think when you have an eternal perspective, I think that helps. And when you're not dwelling on the past, on the problems, when you're looking at Jesus and the hope and the future, I think that can bring some healing, because too often I think we get stuck in that past of worrying about things that happened in the past. And there's hope and healing and restoration that comes from Jesus.
Right. And I think we know we can't fix it ourselves either, or with another person. So He offers peace and purpose and identity that doesn't depend on other people. I think we often get caught up in trying to fix things ourselves when we shouldn't.
Yeah, well, divorce is, and broken relationships, either one, the difference between those and death is you still see those people, right?
Right.
As somebody who's been divorced, I still see my first wife, and it's a non-controversial relationship at this point. But that's the hard part about divorce, is you have to continue to see that. The same is true of broken relationships. Imagine this woman, if all 5 of those men are still in the community, right? We're not talking about even we live in Edenton, 5,000 people. That would have been a metropolis during this day, right? We're not talking about, a walled city could have been 300 or 400 people, that could have been a small group of people. And so if she's going around town, everybody knows, she's got to see her ex-husbands, their new wives,
She's at the food line.
Right. Because I think about even when there are difficulties or misunderstandings among church people, and then you have to see those people out in public again, it's awkward.
Right.
What do you say? What do you do? Or do they still hold this against me? Do I hold something against them? And I think having to lean into Jesus and ask Him for wisdom and healing that is personal, because you can't always heal the relationship or the other person, but personal healing so that you can move on. Now, the trouble that creates a whole nother tension because they're like, well, they don't care anymore, and sometimes people want you to care, but it's broken relationships and divorce are so difficult. It's different than death because when somebody's dead, you bury them. When somebody moves away, you never see them again. But broken relationships where you go to the same church or you live in the same town, especially a small town, I remember talking to a couple who was coming to church here, and they had they both were going through a divorce and had an extramarital affair, and they were from a large city, like million plus kind of people, and they were like, it's just so uncomfortable having to bump into people, at the grocery store. I was like, imagine what it's like, living in a small town. It's a big deal. So, does Jesus make a difference in how you personally deal with stress?
Like today, I came in here and I'm like, I'm just stressed out of my mind. Like I got a lot going on. There's things that I have to do at home to make sure that things are sorted for like family coming in. There's things that I have to do at work. We're working on the transitioning some of these things, and so like life's just a lot right now. But last night, kind of as I was praying and reading about this, this kept speaking to me. And I was just like, I don't have to worry about any of these things. Like, I have to be diligent and work at them and just work as hard as I can. But I don't need to be stressed in it because I know that I don't have to do everything alone. I can pray and let go and let God, that saying, and trust that He's in control.
Pentecostal's coming out of you.
Church of God, baby.
Yeah, I think, this is one of the topics we talk about later this week, but when your identity is in Christ, then other people's opinions don't matter. And I think that's where some of this stress, I could list off all the things that are stressing me, but I think, everyone has that list. And it doesn't even really matter how stressed you are. If I looked at other people's, I'm like, I wouldn't be stressed with that list. Mm-hmm. But everyone feels, I think, in today's society, like they are stretched to the max. Right. And then when you don't do it, you're like, what are other people going to think about it when I don't do X, Y, and Z to this level? So I think the identity thing is really one of the keys that I've come to. There's been times when I'm stressed, and that is what I just have to tell myself, even if this doesn't work out, my identity is in Christ and it's going to be okay. And having to reframe those thoughts that are just kind of start swirling when stress turns to anxiety.
Well, there's so much of our lives that are like a little blip. And like, if you think about the grand scheme of our life, my life, your life, these tiny little stressors. So this week where I'm really stressed, or this month where I'm really stressed, is this tiny little blip in the grand scheme of what God has called me to do. So I know that I don't have to stress too much over this week. Some things are really big, but most things that I think we face are kind of like, hey, take a chill pill. You're fine.
Stress is necessary. That's the first thing. If not, if you don't have tension of some kind in your life, you don't grow. Things become, what's the word? When the muscle
atrophy.
Atrophy ensues in your life. And I tend to operate at a pretty high stress level on a daily basis. But I'll share something that I'm trying to work through right this minute. The stress in general typically doesn't bother me, but I am trying to work through something personally that is challenging, and I think I think everybody can use some of the things I'm going to say. So, for the last year and a half, I guess, every Friday morning at 8:00, I got anxious. And I could explain why. I'm not going to. I could explain why. Every Friday morning, something had happened. And after that, every Friday morning at 8:00, it was just, I could just feel inside of me, just like, what am I going to do? Over the last couple of months, it's turned into every morning at 8:00, every morning. And if I get past 8, right, if I could explain the situation, it would, but I just don't want to. I'm just trying to help in a general terms. but it's turned into every morning at 8 o'clock. And man, for the last couple of weeks, I have been praying and trying to read some scriptures, and trying to find some ways to ease that response. How am I going to, what can I do, Lord, here? And there's a couple of things that I have figured out, that in just in my prayer and my reading. One, because I operate at such a high level of stress, I don't have a lot of margin. And so if something traumatic, and that's how I probably would describe this, is affecting my thought process, I don't have any room to accommodate it. So it just it feels like a gorilla when it shouldn't. And, so one of the things that, if you could read my journal for the last couple of weeks, a lot of writing has been on elimination. What can I eliminate? So that when I do have an abnormal stressor in my life that I couldn't do anything about, and I could not do anything about this situation, I couldn't do anything about it, then it's not going to remove the stress, right? But I'm going to be able to deal with it better because I've created some room to be able to deal with it. And I think prayer, Psalms are a great place, because David was, I don't know what all he struggled with. I would be scared to say. I read what people write, that he struggled with depression, anxiety, other things. And he's a high capacity leader, but he clearly wrote through many of those things. How do I deal with these? I think reading the Psalms is very helpful. Prayers reading is very helpful. And then leaning in and asking some other people to pray with you so that you don't feel like you carry it by yourself. Right. Stress is it's the number one killer, right? It kills people. It creates high blood pressure, heart disease, so many other things. And if we don't figure out how to deal with it, it'll wreck us. And so when I talk about Jesus making a difference, right now I'm working through something where I'm asking him daily, what can I do here? And how can I deal with this? And I'm finding some comfort in that. And, I guess I want to say that because sometimes people they think the enemy isolates us and believes we're the only ones that are dealing with whatever, and we're not. Everybody is dealing with some level of it. So, well, thank you today for joining us on this edition of One Single Story. We hope you'll be back with us tomorrow as we continue a conversation around our daily Bible reading from the One Year Bible.